Packers Jags. This one's in Jacksonville. I feel like Green Bay's riding high. Jacksonville, I guess, is kind of too, coming off of a back-to-back weeks in London where first game, not so great. Second game, they really took care of business. They're at least playing the best ball that we have seen them play so far this season. So they're coming off of a big win. Both of these teams are. What do we think is going to happen in this one? What's the matchup that matters, Carmen?
Yeah, it's got to be Brian Thomas Jr. against Jair Alexander. I think that's the most exciting one anyway. BTJ just continues to be the bright spot for this Jacksonville offense, for this Jacksonville team, especially, before they got that other win under their belt in London. 78.7 PFF grade, which ranks 14th among wide receivers, but 513 receiving yards, 6th among receivers, 193 yards after the catch. That's the big thing here is he is just one of those guys that Trevor Lawrence can depend on to make him look good. 4 receiving touchdowns, which is tied for 7th. This is the big thing, though, with him, is the throws over 20-plus yards. He has 6 catches for over 20 yards. That's tied for 3rd. 283 yards total on catches like that, 4th, and then 2 receiving touchdowns, which is tied for 6th of 20 or more yards. So this is the guy that you use to push the ball down the field. This is the number one guy you need that Trevor Lawrence is targeting right now. This is the guy that you need to stop if you're Green Bay's offense or defense rather. And that should be the responsibility of Jair Alexander. He is not shy about saying he wants to go against teams' number 1 wide receivers. That was something that he was really adamant about last week. The whole Stephon Diggs, Jair Alexander, whatever you want to call that pregame, scruffle, kerfuffle, all of the fun little words for a little dust up that continues throughout the whole game.
Dust up's a good one. I like that.
Dust up, yeah. It was very chippy, and like the whole teams, like both teams got involved in that, and so that's the kind of effect that Jair has. Do I think that he's going to pick that fight with a rookie? I don't know. I don't think there's as much bad blood built up between him and BTJ. But that doesn't change the fact that this is the guy that you're going to have to shut down if you're Green Bay's defense.
I thought it was hilarious that Stephon was like, I'll never be the bigger man.
Oh,
absolutely.
I loved it. I am so pro petty, Trevor. Like, absolutely. He's like, I'm never going to go high. I'm always going to be.
I know. It's just, it's so hilarious hearing him say those words because we're always told like, hey, be the bigger person, be the bigger man, like whatever it is. And it's just, and he just goes, I'll never be the bigger man.
I won't. Don't try me. And I adore it. I really do.
Look, I don't know if Jair is going to sort of give BTJ, like you said, like that sort of, treatment, but Jair is going to talk.
He always talks. So, even when he's not involved in the play. That's
100%. I thought I did think it was hilarious. Scott Hansen, who I do think obviously does a great job on Red Zone, they were previewing that game and they showed that little scuffle that was going on. And Scott was saying like, oh, like it's Stephon Diggs. And I think he's seeing the video for the first time, like as they had it on the screen. So he didn't know, like he hadn't seen it before. He didn't know which players were involved or anything. And you could see, obviously, one of them is Stephon Diggs. And then it was a sea of Green Bay Packers who were there.
Right. Steph was about to fight the whole team.
And he's like, Stephon Diggs getting into an altercation. You see, I think like Nixon, like he could literally just read the back of his jersey, like Nixon, he's right there. And he just goes, I'm sure Jair Alexander is in there. He didn't even see Jair Alexander. No. And he was just like, I'm just going to make a safe bet here and say that Jair Alexander is probably involved.
Dude,
but that's why.
There were multiple times in that game, too, where like it was a runner, like a running back, that it was Joe Mixon. And the defensive line stopped Joe Mixon. But Jair somehow is right there being like, yeah, what? And I'm like, you didn't do anything. You were standing there. You didn't do anything.
It's the beauty of being a corner. It really is. My matchup that matters in this one, we've talked a lot about the Jags' deep passing attack, and I think you're right. If the Jags are going to have success in the passing game, it's going to be through Brian Thomas Jr. What he does really well is he wins deep down the field. But I think through the first 5-6 weeks of the season, the Jags were sort of like we just talked about with the Colts, too reliant on that. They want to throw the ball deep, but you have to do the work to be able to open things up deep. It cannot just be that, because the completion percentage and the odds that you're going to win the football game with that as your main emphasis aren't good when you can't do the other things well. Jags ran the ball really well last week. Tank Bigsby had over 100 yards. He had a 4.5 yards per carry average. Dearness Johnson as well had above a 4.0 yards per carry average. So this team was moving the ball on the ground. And to me, that's when Jacksonville is good, when they are running the ball in a complementary, efficient fashion. They need to continue to do that. Now, this will be a game where I think the Packers are going to push them on the scoreboard. They're going to need to hit those big shots over the top and really be able to push the ball to match up with them. But it can't just be that. Your focus has to be, if you're Jacksonville, we want to run the ball well, because when they can do that, then everything else kind of ties into it. So when you look at the Jags, top 8 in EPA per rush and total rushing yards last week, and when they're going up against a Packers defense that is 25th in rushing grade at 56.1 and 18th in EPA per rush allowed this season. So the Packers have not been great at run defense this year, and it's a recipe for the Jags to have back-to-back really good games on the ground, which I think they're going to need. What's your plus factor in this game?
Well, Wes over at Packers.com did a wonderful story just kind of about what we were talking about earlier, where the simulated pressures that Jeff Hafley brought along that defensive front and how that affected CJ Stroud this last game, and what they tried to do to get pressure, which is something that Green Bay has struggled with so far this year. But what was so interesting too was Rashawn Gary was, you think, he's one of the highlights of this defense. You want to see more from him when it comes to pass rush production. And against Houston, instead of just kind of rushing Rashawn Gary on every play, he was used more as a decoy. And I think that this is where it comes in, where you can start to kind of play chess as a defensive coordinator, where, all right, you showed on tape with Houston that you're doing these simulated pressures. Rashawn Gary isn't always rushing. He's not always involved, all that other stuff. Now, against the Jags, now that you've put that on tape, bring Rashawn Gary. Hammer him off that edge every single play. Have him involved in the blitz. Do something kind of completely different than what you put on tape. And don't use Rashawn Gary as much as a decoy, because what Jacksonville's going to do when they're game planning here, they're going to identify that and say, hey, yeah, we don't actually have to worry about Rashawn Gary every time, because he didn't actually come most of the time. He was used as just kind of a way to get the quarterback's eyes away from guys that were coming, like Xavier McKinney, who got that sack on CJ Stroud. That was one of the things that Rashawn Gary set up in particular. Now, switch it up. And I'm going to be very interested to see if that's in fact what Jeff Hafley does. And I think that can be a huge plus factor because of how much you want to get out of Rashawn Gary, how much you know that he's capable of. With this kind of scheme shift, you haven't seen him fit in as well, I think, to the 4-3 that Jeff Hafley runs versus the 3-4 that they've run in Green Bay the past 15 years. Mm-hmm. In fact, that's where that kind of stuff starts to show up, is in your personnel, and are they equipped to handle kind of the way that those roles are differentiated in those base schemes, although base schemes are just so fluid these days. So it's not that matters necessarily. I'm just going to be very interested to see what Rashawn Gary is able to do and how productive he can potentially be against Jacksonville.
My plus factor is Jordan Love. And again, a little bit more of an obvious one here, but I think that it has to be, because in my opinion, I said this on the grades release show. I said it on the quarterback show when I was talking with Seth Galina about it. I think the Packers offense is ready to just take it to the moon. When you go back and you watch Jordan Love's games over the last couple of weeks in particular, he is fearless. There is not a throw that he is shy about making. He is extremely confident in that offense. He knows how to layer the throws. He's got a really good feel for touch throws and fastball throws, and how much air to put underneath each, and good chemistry with each of his receiving options, the tight ends included. And man, there are a few quarterbacks right now that are playing with more confidence than Jordan Love is. And sure, you see a little bit of the ups and downs. You see some of the turnover-worthy plays. But again, I went back and over the last 2 weeks, I watched all those turnover-worthy plays. And yeah, okay, some of them you'd say to yourself, all right, you could maybe not put the ball in harm's way that much next time. But at the same time, Carmen, that's what playing the quarterback position is all about. Like, of course, we would love to have zero turnover-worthy plays for our quarterbacks, but that's not this league. It's so competitive. You're going to throw turnover-worthy plays. I don't want the boneheaded decision turnover-worthy plays, but if you're giving your guy a chance and you're attempting a throw confidently and appropriately, right, I'm okay with that. It's part of playing the quarterback at the highest level. Jordan Love does that. And Through the second half of last season, he was, I think, our number 3 graded quarterback. He was a top 5 quarterback in a lot of ways, top 3 quarterback in a lot of ways. I know he had an elite PFF passing grade during that time from week 10 on. We could very well be in for another second half explosion of the season from Jordan Love, given the hints of what we have already seen him play with this week. So to me, he's the big plus factor, because if he starts to turn into that player again, I don't think Jacksonville is going to be able to keep up.
I saw a meme on Twitter, and it was like, inside Jordan Love, there are 2 wolves, and they put Brett Favre and Aaron Rodgers on either side, because that is exactly the kind of quarterback that Jordan Love is. I mean, you look at like Brett Favre. I grew up watching Brett Favre being in Chicago, and I mean, hating his guts for that matter. But he was absolutely fearless with the way that he threw the ball, and you kind of live by the sword, die by the sword, but you were living by the sword a lot more than you were dying with it, again, as someone who was rooting for the team going against him all the time. And then you have Aaron Rodgers, and I think you saw a lot of Aaron Rodgers towards the back half of last season in Jordan Love, where he was extraordinarily accurate, and he was a little bit more conservative, but very good with his receivers, had all of the trust in them. And I mean, you look at that play to Tucker Kraft this last week, the touchdown, I just like the audacity with which Jordan Love throws the ball is just incredible. And you don't get those plays if you don't take some risks. But I mean, it was one of those things where it went through the defender's hand, but was a laser to Tucker Kraft and could not have been thrown any millisecond later or earlier than it was. It was just so perfect. And that is what Jordan Love is so good at. It's incredible. He's so fun to watch. And I'm with you. I think that he could absolutely just go take off to the moon the rest of the season.